report to the Senate for confirmation the underlisted 28 ministerial nominees.
After weeks of speculation, President Bola Tinubu sends list of ministerial nominees to the Senate.
Better days ahead for micro and small business owners as President Tinubu promises low-interest loans.
Super Falcons triumph over co-host Australia at the ongoing 2023.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we examine the situation in Niger and lessons for Africa.
On May 29 this year, Nigeria marked 24 years of unbroken democratic governance, leading to a peaceful transition of power to another democratically elected government under the leadership of His Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu. While Nigerians consider this as a consolidation of civilian rule and the growth of democracy in the country, the story is unfortunately not the same for other African countries.
That's right, Kieran. Now, military coups were a familiar occurrence in the decades after independence in Africa. But such changed significantly when most countries on the continent embraced democracy, leading to the thinking that coups were gone for good. Now, that appears not to be the case as we continue to witness a resurgence of undemocratic change of government in Africa recently.
And Kingsley, you will recall that in 2017, a military takeover in Zimbabwe brought the nearly 4 decades-long rule of Robert Mugabe to an end, while a similar action in 2019 toppled Sudan's Omar al-Bashir. In recent years, there have been other successful military takeovers, particularly within the West African sub-region, in countries like Mali, Guinea, Chad, and Burkina Faso.
Of course, there have been other attempts that were futile in countries such as Guinea-Bissau, the Gambia, Sudan itself, and the island nation of Sao Tome and Principe. Now, Wednesday's attempt to overthrow the democratically elected government of President Mohamed Bazoum in Niger Republic comes shortly after the ECOWAS heads of state and government meeting in Guinea-Bissau denounced military coups and vowed to resist them henceforth.
President Bola Tinubu, who took over as ECOWAS chairman at the Guinea-Bissau summit, said the body will no longer allow coups in the African sub-region anymore. He indicated that the matter of coups will be taken up very seriously with the African Union, the EU, America, the UK, and the United Nations, among others, with a view to discouraging any further attempt to peacefully truncate, or forcefully rather, truncate democratic governments.
Now, this resolve by ECOWAS under its new chairman, President Tinubu, is clearly being tested with the latest adventure in Nigeria's next-door neighbor, Niger Republic. And of course, the ECOWAS chairman swiftly dispatched President Patrice Talon of Benin Republic to Niger in a bid to try and intervene to ensure that the coup is rescinded. But the mission appears not to be yielding much at this stage, as the plotters insist that they have overthrown the government and are fully in charge, while President Mohamed Bazoum himself is defiant.
You see, that's what we keep getting in Africa, and it is becoming one coup too many in this continent. Almost every part of the African continent is feeling this. There's no doubt that the indices of coups within the West African sub-region is worrisome, particularly as it has so far been recorded in mostly Francophone countries that are battling one form of insurgency or the other. Indeed, some of the excuses given by the military takeovers include the need to restore security, tackle corruption, and improve the living standards of the citizens. In short, there is a posture that tends to suggest that civilian governments are not strong enough to address the challenges of the countries.
That's right, but this picture, whether true or not, is of course one that is subject to further evaluation. Now, some have suggested that there is an international dimension to the happenings, especially where some of the affected Francophone countries seem to have experienced a breakdown in relations with their former colonial authority, namely France. Now, others say that Russia, of course, also has some questions to answer with recent developments as it strives to increase its influence in the West African sub-region.
Whatever the case may be, there is a clear threat to democracy in the continent and within the West African sub-region, which must be addressed without further delay. What are regional and global organizations doing to halt this undemocratic change of government? What role can individual countries play to ensure that the military permanently stays in the barracks? Do citizens have a role to play in all of these? These and more questions shall be interrogated as we bring you another edition of Good Morning Nigeria, as we discuss also the situation in Niger Republic, lessons for Africa. My name is Kirian Umayo. Thank you indeed for finding time to join us.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I joined my colleague Kirian to also welcome you to the program. It's the last edition, of course, for the week, and we are reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, broadcasting from our Abuja headquarters studios, as always, in the nation's capital. Now, in the course of the program, we have the highlights of the morning news presently. They will take business and newspaper review. Here now is Dennis Adegunoye with the morning news. Morning, Dennis.
Good morning, Kingsley and Kirian. Good morning, Nigerians. This is the morning news. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has submitted to the Senate 28 ministerial nominees for screening and confirmation by the Red Chamber. Chief of Staff to the President, Femi Gbajabiamila, brought the list, which for many was worth the wait after more than 2 weeks of speculation.
I am pleased to forward to the Senate for confirmation the underlisted 28 ministerial nominees. Abubakar Momo, Ambassador Yusuf Maitama Chuka, Ezenwa Nyesom Wike, Nasir Ahmed El Rufai, David Omaye, Dele Alake.
Meanwhile, micro and small business owners may have better days ahead under the current administration, as President Bola Tinubu has promised low-interest loans facilities for them as part of forthcoming efforts to strengthen the nation's economy. The president revealed this plan during his interaction with APC youths at the State House.
We trust and we have full confidence in the man on the steering. We know that he has the full intention to ensure that Nigeria is on the path of greatness.
Our life is back. Our prosperity is coming. Our happiness is along the way.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says his government is making efforts to avert a global food crisis. He stated this at the plenary session of the two-day Russia-Africa summit attended by African heads of state and government. Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima is attending the summit.
When it comes to developing our infrastructure, industrialization process, the energy issues of our continent, we will further assist our African friends in developing not only the college but also general and vocational education.
The House of Representatives has constituted and inaugurated 134 standing committees that will perform oversight over other arms of government. Speaker of the House, Tajuddin Abbas, at Thursday's plenary, wants the leadership of the committees to consider the constitutional powers of oversight by the legislature as a means to promote good governance through compliance with the laws of the land.
It involves dividing the legislature into smaller component units, working groups, which aims to enhance efficiency, improve productivity, and enable detailed scrutiny of legislative instruments such as bills and motions.
Nigeria's First Lady, Oluremi Tinubu, says she is keen to see more women empowered in the country to leverage on support from international agencies. The First Lady also maintains that she is determined to remove barriers hindering women and other vulnerable groups in the country. In the meantime, Nigeria's Super Falcons edged out co-hosts Australia for maximum 3 points at the ongoing FIFA Women's World Cup. With the win, the Super Falcons have a good chance of qualifying from the group stage with 4 points from 2 matches. And the Super Falcons' next game is against already eliminated Ireland. That is the news for now. Do stay with us. After the break, the program continues with Kingsley and Kieran. Good morning.
It's indeed good to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria today. We now talk business. Security and Exchange Commission is developing a roadmap for the actualization of a vibrant commodities ecosystem. Get to know what that means when we bring in Vivian Salife for details of that and more on Business News.
Commodity exchange has the potential to efficiently link commodities to industries by creating jobs, improving living standards, and unlocking the economic potentials of farming communities to enhance financial inclusion for smallholder farmers and ultimately facilitate economic development. The Security and Exchange Commission is developing a roadmap for the promotion of rural development. This in consideration of government policy shift towards economic diversification and the need to deepen capacity across the agricultural value chain. Meanwhile, efforts are being intensified by the government to create market access and linkages for global trade for farmers and entrepreneurs in the country.
We are talking about the AFCFTA, and of course the focus is on Africa and regional integration. And we look at markets where our products have competitive and comparative advantage. When you are in the market, you can actually step into the market and then find, people who require your products and then try to reach out to them.
With Business News, Vivian Salife.
Thank you very much, Vivian, for the Business News package. Up next, we'll take a look at the window pages of some of today's newspapers.
And here we have Chukwudi Okoli-Waja with us, as always. Chukwudi, welcome to this edition of Good Morning Nigeria.
Hello, Kieran. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm great.
And you, Kingsley?
Very well, thanks. We're glad to have you. Of course, as to be expected, the front pages of the papers we have this morning filled with stories on the unveiling of the nominees for ministerial appointment, as read by the Senate President in the course of the plenary yesterday. Let's begin with the Punch. Now, the Punch has a double-decker headline and 2 riders, and of course, with mock shots of, or with passport photograph shots of the nominees. El-Rufai, Wike, and other nominees face Senate screening Monday. President will create new ministries, form full cabinet in 2 weeks. That's according to Gbajabiamila Mila. National Assembly awaits other states' nominees. PDP faults Wike's nomination. Lampoons Tinubu over list. Then, of course, above the nameplate of the Punch newspaper, it says subsidy removal. Tinubu begs Nigerians to persevere more. NMA, that's Medical Association, demands MOU as federal government okays 25,000 naira doctor's allowance. And this is a special report. Margaret Benson Idahosa, matriarch of Nigerian Pentecostalism. She turned 80. And then, of course, at the foot of the front page of the Punch newspaper, diphtheria. 130 hospitalized in Kaduna, and states begin immunization. Bandits kidnap 23 Zamfara women, 10 construction workers. United Nations halts humanitarian operations as U.S., France condemn Niger coup. Kira, let me also very quickly take the Nation newspaper. Yeah. Okay, the Nation newspaper also has on its front page the lead story, presidency, why Tinubu picked Wike, El-Rufai and others. And you have a sidebar there showing the nominees and their states of origin. Amongst the three riders to the lead story says 11 states yet to have slots. Then also there on the front page, let's say above the nameplate, says 1,200 Nigerian youth perished in Mediterranean, says NIS. Sheriff strike plan, police caution labor, security breach a concern. House of Reps gets 134 standing committees. Uzodima to security, save Southeast from sit at home. Court rejects DSS motion to further detain Emefiele. U.S. pledges support to Bazoum after coup, and coup leader while we struck. Now, you can see the photograph there. This is the subject matter of our conversation. Buses that are being converted to use compressed natural gas. And this is in Ogun State. Right at the foot of the front page, Senator Bukka Chua sues DSS and ICPC over harassment. That's on page 6. We all recall what he said at the valedictory session of the 9th Senate, where he was saying something about his wife as president of the Court of Appeal before he was frozen in his tracks by the then Senate president. So he's suing the DSS and ICPC over harassment. Guild of Editors honors Jakonde, page 28. Clear.
All right, now let's turn to the New Telegraph newspaper. Above the name flag of the paper, fuel price hike, telecoms operators, more fresh increase in tariffs. That's on page 3. Let's say Naira could weaken to 850 Naira to $1. All right, other news items include insurgency, 2,168 ex-combatants de-radicalized, reintegrated, according to the Defense Headquarters. Program better after counter-insurgency war, according to Ejiofor. The stories on page 2. Committee chairs, Abbas names Wase, Jaji Betara, Gaji Faleke, Ibori's daughter, El-Rufai's son, and 125 others. Adjourned till September, as on page 5. Insecurity, reps ask IGP to protect government officials in the southeast. As US hints new ministries may be created. As the chief of staff hints new ministries may be created. It's on page 6. Obaseki appoints New Telegraph's tourism editor, Ogumboa, as a chief press secretary. It's on page 5. Now the lead story on the New Telegraph. Finally, Tinubu asks Senate to confirm 28 ministerial nominees. The riders to that story, ex-governors Omahi, Badaru, Wike, El-Rufai, 7 females, Adelabu, Blueprint publisher, make list. Chamber begins screening Monday, says process will be thorough. Presidency, why Tinubu didn't attach portfolios to appointees, says nominees will start work ahead of confirmation. President didn't breach any law by not submitting full list at a go. That's according to SANS, that's the SAN. All right. Other stories, NLC strike. Ex-DPR chief warns against another recession. With a rider, public office holders should reduce cost of governance. According to Obioha, the stories on pages 4, 9, and 10. Shell's profit tumbles 56% to $5 billion as energy price income falls as LNG refining profit slump. Switzerland's 300 million naira yearly pay tops doctor salary globally, as according to reports. That's on page 3. Now, Emefiele, court refuses DSS application for continued detention for 14 days. Application abuse of court process, say lawyers. Coup, aircraft conveying Nigerian pilgrims trapped in Niger. Max Air, to be precise. Coup supporters set fire to ruling party's headquarters. It's on pages 4 and 29 of the Telegraph newspaper. Let's bring in Chukwudi now and let's know where Chukwudi is going to come from. What is it for you today, Chukwudi?
The setting on fire of the ruling party headquarters in Niger tells you that you can't predict the rabble. You can't predict the ordinary people. Initially, we got reports that they were actually against the putsch, the coup. They started chanting, well, maybe those ones were propelled or were representative of partisan interests. But now you're hearing that people are setting fire to the ruling party headquarters. So you never ever can tell the mind of the rabble, the ordinary people. That's the way it goes, you know. But back to to home soil, to more domestic matters. The long-awaited ministerial list has been finally been submitted. Yes, not every state has been represented yet. I think about 10 more states are going to have to wait for.
11 or so.
Okay, this paper says 10, and list them as Adamawa, Bayelsa, Gombe, Kano, Kebbi, Kogi, Lagos, Osun, Yobe, Zamfara. I don't think accuracy is very important in this matter. The important thing is that the president has beaten the deadline of 60 days, I think by 1 day or so. Okay, the arithmetic of it I can leave to Kirian. Fine. So, ultimately, we are interested in what kind of caliber of people are coming in. Personally, on a note of emotion, when I hear Wale Do, I'm happy. I tend to remember that man when I was in Lagos. I like him. When I hear El-Rufai, I think also I smile. Because I tell people, maybe my sentiment again, after El-Rufai, I don't know the earth-moving development that has happened in Abuja. You know, you may not like some of the things that come from the man's lips. You're free to have your opinion about him. So the caliber of the people, as I said, very, very important. Because at this point in time, Nigerians are looking for people who would be Toknadu people, if I may use that term. We are still in the woods, economically, socially, culturally, security-wise, whatever. I know the ministers are not the ones who are in charge of security, but I'm trying to give, you know, an impression of where we are as a nation. So we need people who can work. Now, concerning the area of gender, you know, equality, I think I like the fact that 7 female, you know, prospects have been named on this cabinet. I think women are holding the short end of the stick in Nigeria in terms of being centrally in governance. It is very important that we do bring them in. Very, very important that we do bring them in. Now, this practice, because it's, well, tradition maybe we should call it, of not attaching portfolios to the people who are coming in as ministers. I don't know, I think it has advantages and maybe disadvantages, in the sense that if the president wanted Kirian as Minister of Broadcasting, I hear it's likely new ministries are going to come up. The COS, I think, was attributed in terms of that story. If new ministries are going to come in as standalone ministries, standalone, you know, when you have labor and employment and productivity, blah, 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 you might want to now separate and all that. Fine, good. That is not bad. But if it does happen, is it going to fly in the face of the Steve Oronsai recommendation about reducing a bloated cabinet and all that, reducing parastatals and all that? We have to keep that in sight and in mind as we work towards what's going to be efficient in terms of running this country. I think it's something we should take a look at. Okay.
You know, in terms of the caliber of men and women who have been nominated, President Tinubu. I personally, I don't see anything fantastic about the nominations, because we've always had persons who have the capacity to deliver. I'm not sure I have seen any cabinet in Nigeria that beats Babangida's cabinet at the time. At his time when he was a Nigerian military president, he took over. I mean, when it comes to economy, remember Chu Kungu, Idika, Kalu Idika, and the rest of them. Even in other aspects, in other ministries and parastatals, he brought in Naseni, for instance, in terms of ensuring that Naseni had a tentacle that will accommodate other facets of science, technology, and innovation, and what have you. So, but the point is, when you start the job of implementation, we begin to have issues. That's just my problem. There's no person he nominated that is not good enough to be there. They're all qualified to be there. But my concern has always been, when you get there, what do? I mean, whatever you're doing, you are implementing the policies of government. But when the implementation aspect of these policies do not trickle down, to ordinary Nigerians, of course, the whole thing would have been a ruse. So that's why I look at it. So the nominee is fantastic, but then let's get the job started, and I'll begin to now make assessments of how they intend to, move governance ahead.
Just to draw attention to a few highlights with respect to the nominees and the reportage that followed the submission of the list to the Senate. Some of the nominees were previously ministers. Some, of course, were also previously governors and even ministers. Of course, El-Rufai is very well known. He was Minister of FCT and two-term governor of Kaduna State. Nyesom Wike was Minister of State Education under Goodluck Jonathan and two-term governor of Rivers State. Professor Partey was Minister of Health under Goodluck Jonathan, and he later left and went to Duke University in North Carolina. And then, of course, he's now back again as a ministerial nominee. Obviously, his portfolio will be health. Umahi is currently in the 10th Senate as a senator of the Federal Republic. And what this means is that if he is vetted and cleared by the Senate and he takes the oath of office as a minister of the Federal Republic, whatever portfolio is assigned, then he loses his seat in the Senate. That means there will be a by-election to fill in that vacancy. And something happened. I'm sure some of us will remember this during the Obasanjo presidency, when the then Senator Udo Udoma was also nominated as a minister. He was cleared, and then, of course, at the point of swearing in, he was assigned a portfolio, I think Minister of Culture and Tourism or so, but he declined to step forward to take the oath of office as a minister. So he returned to the Senate. He didn't lose his seat, but subsequently he became chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and of course also served later on as Minister of Budget and National Planning. So a number of course, new faces that are there. Dele Alaka is very well known as our colleague.
Yes.
He used to be editor of National Concord and, of course, a close ally of MK Abiola and the president. He also served as Commissioner for Information in Lagos.
Yes.
Wale Edun was one of the founders of Stanbic IBTC along with Atedo Peterside.
Track record.
So it's been in the financial services cycle. Well, what it means also is that we are having a transition. What has happened in 2002, 2003, again, these are things we just throw in. You recall there were placeholder candidates for the elections. It would appear now that some of those persons who were previously appointed as special advisors were likely to be placeholders. There are at least three of them. Musawa Haratu was one of them. Dele Alake, one of them. And Wale Edun.
Kingsley, there's one very interesting thing before we round up.
Yes.
Name Beta Edu, age 36. Likely portfolio a paper is trying to project. Women Affairs. Name Stella Okotete, age 38. Likely portfolio, finance. The ages of these people, beside the fact that they are women, very interesting. It is a very good message.
Yeah,
it is something we must note.
Well,
and it is movement forward.
Betty Edu and Okotete, they've been our guests on Good Morning Nigeria. Betty Edu was Commissioner for Health in Cross River. And Okotete, I think, I'm not quite sure what the portfolio was. I think it was APC Woman Leader or so, where they had some conferences. It's from Delta State. So it's an interesting lead-up. The story that Kyrian you read, with respect to the views of some senior advocates, whether the president breached the constitutional stipulation for the submission of a full list 60 days after he takes over office. I think that's an issue. If I start making my own comments now, we're likely to overrun.
Stretch.
Yes, we're likely to overrun. But the Chief of Staff to the President has already indicated that more names, of course, will come. What I find a bit curious, when they are counting the states that don't have nominees as at the moment, the Plateau State is not being mentioned. What is there an excision of Plateau from the list? You find of some states have two, others will come. This is the first batch we are told, but we'll see how it goes.
Let's see what happens. You know, good enough. We have good nominees, but again, you have to put a square peg in a square hole to be able to work. Just like you said, somebody declined the position at the point of being swearing in. That means that it is. I don't understand the wisdom in not attaching portfolios to people who have been nominated. Whatever it is, I don't think it goes down well with me. But as the case may be, let's get to where these persons will begin to function effectively, and let's see whether they'll be efficient and whether they will deliver. That's the most important aspect of all of this. Chukwudi, thank you for being here this morning.
I wouldn't like to leave without hitting you on the Kyrian. You're on Kingsley below the belt. Stella Okotete is from my Delta State. You know, we're youthful there. Chooks the boys, Stella is 38. You know, that's how it runs.
That's good enough. Just have to do a good job. We'll see you again on Monday.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, only on the network service of the NTA. We'll take a short break now. We thank you for staying with us up to this moment on Good Morning Nigeria. And as a prompt for our conversation on the situation in Niger Republic, Lessons for Africa, let's bring in this background report as put together by Abdul Salam Jubril.
On Wednesday, a group of soldiers in Nigeria's neighboring Niger Republic claimed to have overthrown the country's democratically elected president, Mohamed Bazoum, after many hours of taking the president hostage. Announcing on a military coup on national television, the leader of the junta, Colonel Major Amadou Abdurrahmani, said Nigeria's presidential guard had detained Bazoum, dissolved the constitution, suspended all institutions, and closed the nation's borders. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who is the chairperson of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, immediately condemned the coup attempt, describing it as another unpleasant development around the country's highest political leadership. The chairperson also warned that ECOWAS and all lovers of democracy around the world will not tolerate any situation that incapacitates the democratically elected government of the country. Recall that military coups were a regular occurrence in Africa in the decades after independence, and experts are increasingly becoming concerned that there appears to be a resurgence of what many thought was a thing of the past. In recent years, there have been military takeovers, particularly within the West African sub-region, like in Mali, Guinea, Chad, and Burkina Faso, as well as failed coup attempts in Guinea-Bissau, the Gambia, Sudan, and the island nation of Sao Tome and Principe. In terms of frequency of occurrence, Sudan has had the most coups and attempted takeovers in Africa, having recorded 16 attempts, with 6 of them successful. Burundi comes in second with 11, Sierra Leone, Ghana, and Burkina Faso with 10, Guinea-Bissau and Comoros with 9, Nigeria, Mali, and Benin Republic with 8. Although there are many reasons given by coupists for the overthrow of democratically elected governments, a few of them seem to be very common to most of the takeovers. These include political instability, pervasive corruption, ethno-religious tensions, insecurity and inability of the elected governments to protect the people and sovereignty of the countries. Experts wonder why there is a resurgence of coups in Africa, despite the fact that there appears to be a common position within sub-regional, regional, and global bodies such as ECOWAS, the African Union, the United Nations, among others, rejecting any form of overthrow of democratically elected governments. Others have also raised concerns why the recent resurgence appears to be in Francophone countries. Could this be a coincidence, or is there more than meets the eye? How can this ugly situation be brought to an end? What are the triggers for coups, and to what extent does this impact on democracy on the continent? Guest on the program will be speaking to these and more shortly.
Abdul Salam Jibril, thank you very much for that backgrounder. We have guests who are here with us in the studios to drill into the developments in Niger Republic and lessons for the rest of the African continent. Let's welcome Ambassador Joe Keshi, a seasoned diplomat and former permanent secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador Keshi, we're glad to have you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning, and nice to see you guys again.
All right, sir. Here with us in the studios is Professor Jibrin Ibrahim. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development. Prof, good to have you on the program.
Thank you.
One of our guests also is Dr. Adoyi Matthew Omale. Dr. Omale is the head of Department, International Relations and Diplomacy, based University, Abuja. So you're welcome to the program.
Good morning, and I'm happy to be with you.
And via Zoom from Owo is Professor Bola Akintarenwa, former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. It's good morning. I'm glad to be with you today.
Good morning.
Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, it's our pleasure to have you with us. I mean, when you have four deeply experienced guests, it's advisable to shoot straight and get into the substance of our conversation, because as each of them begins to dredge up their perspectives, you will soon run out of time. Let me begin with Professor Jibrin Ibrahim. What is it that we are seeing in Africa, and more particularly in West Africa? Is it just a case of democracy in retreat, or it's a new scramble for the continent by powers beyond the continent?
It's clearly both. That is to say, there is democratic regression happening in West Africa in particular, and that democratic regression has had an impact on political stability. For example, Mali, that started this process, went through very bad elections where the then president was suspected to have massively rigged the election, and the government he set up lacked legitimacy. That was the basis on which the coup was justified. At the same time, there is a new Cold War that has affected the geopolitical realities in the region, and specifically France, that has been the hegemon in the Francophone world, which is the majority of West African states, has come under intense challenge. A challenge this time that's coming not from the top, but from the bottom. In a lot of the Sahelian countries, there's been a lot of overt mobilization and organization against French interest, call for withdrawal of French soldiers, etc. And within that context, the new emerging powers, Russia in particular, has seen an opportunity to enter the fray, and there's a sense in which in that Mali was the leader in terms of almost completely expelling France, its interests,
and now even its language is under question. The Niger event was specifically related to the fact that all of its neighbors had already undergone coup. So once Mali happened, it was clear Burkina Faso had to happen. Once Burkina Faso happened, Niger had to happen.
Okay, thank you for that background. Now let's shift to Ambassador Kesh this time around. And I want to take you on one aspect of the points my colleague raised that has to do with foreign, interventions in all of this. During the colonial era, of course, we know that the British system was that of indirect rule, and French system that of assimilation. Is this assimilation or this ideology taken too far by this country? Why I ask this question is because all the nations that we mentioned here that have gone through coups in recent times are all Francophone West African countries. So in your understanding, sir, what is going on? Is it more of a foreign interest or domestic interest?
I personally think that most of these things has to do with domestic interest, which of course include lack of democracy in a number of these countries, which includes bad leadership, economic issues, and the rest of it. I have consistently been arguing for a while that when we look at our problem from the perspective of the fact that we still go back to colonialism and the rest of it, foreign interest, foreign intervention, and so on, I've always argued that, look, 1960 to 2023 is how many years? And we are still talking of colonialism. We are still, instead of domesticating our problems, trying to understand where we have over the years gone, these things, wrongly, and try to find a way out. But we must also remember, as he rightly said, these countries have gone through coups many times. And look, if there is a coup, for example, today in Togo, will anybody be surprised? The guy has been extended, he has finished his first, second, or how many terms? And he's still
his fourth term.
Exactly. So if there is a coup in that country today, will anybody begin to blame France? No. Leaders in this part of the world continue to be the fundamental problems we have. And their inability to develop these countries remain a major and fundamental problem as well. After all, in some of these countries, Niger is not a poor country. By the way, in terms of economic development, his GDP today is about 7.5. So you would certainly say he's doing relatively well, better than a number of countries around it. But then the question remains, what's the problem? In 2021, when this gentleman was, when the ousted president, by the way, I'm not sure whether he's ousted or he's being held or, there were efforts made by soldiers to prevent him from, to stop his inauguration. So there must be something that, it's not very clear in that country that is creating this problem in Niger.
So let me just take care of this before you drop. You mentioned Togo now, for example, where the leader has spent four tenures now. Are you not concerned about the fact that he may be playing the script by France to have sustained himself that long and even trying to do the fifth term, as the case may be? Because if you go to Togo, for instance, if you see even their building style and structure, they're all France. If you go to any city in France and come to Togo, you know the difference.
Look, why did the French not intervene in Senegal and help the president to stay? Because democracy has been over. I'm not too sure. I've been trying to, do a research, but I'm not too sure we've experienced coup in Senegal. So they've probably had a better fundamental foundation than the rest of these countries. And for me, that's my answer to your question. So it boils down, at the end of the day, it is still going to create problems, no matter how long it stays. And the absence of buildings alone do not make development. But we must focus on the fact that 60 or how many years after independence, it's enough time for us, you know, to grow in this part of the world. When you look at development in other parts of the world, some countries made it under 30 years. They became at least middle income, they became developed, and it was all about leadership. It was all about focus on 3 key issues that were triggers of development: agriculture, education, and health, which is something that a number of these countries are not actually looking at.
All right, Ambassador Joe Keshi, thank you very much. We introduced Professor Bola Akinteriwa a moment ago. He's with us via Zoom. If we can see him. Professor Bola Akinteriwa, same question that is on the table. What's your reading of the happenings in Niger Republic? Symptomatic of regression of democracy or symptomatic of a rise of a new scramble for the continent, more particularly the West African sub-region?
First, it is a change in continuity. Change in continuity simply because the environment, the situational reality in Niger has never allowed for the development, for the growth of democracy in Niger. When you go back to the memory lane, when you take a look at the first coup in 1974, and you try to compare and contrast it with what obtains in 2023, you will discover that the problematic, the dynamic that was responsible for the coup making in 1974 is still there. It has been said that Niger has gone through many successful coups, but more in terms of failed coups. Now, what was responsible in 1974? Was the coup not initiated, organized by the Presidential Guard? In 2023, is it not the same Presidential Guard that was responsible? Now, in 1974, what happened? What was responsible, basically? It was, ethnopolitics, greediness. Look at Hamani Diori, the then president. What did he do? As a result of the 1968 to the 1972 drought in the Sahel, there was problem of scarcity of food shortage. There was serious problem, and people were hungry. But what was it that, for instance, Hamani Diori was doing? He stocked 3,000 tons of grains, waiting for a time that there will be price increase. But the people were suffering. That was why, for instance, Senikunche went to him to draw his attention to it. But Hamani Diori didn't bother. And as a matter of fact, this was one major reason why Senikunche organized that. And the people of Niger had to support the coup. Why? Simply because Hamani Diori, as president, also declared himself Minister of Foreign and Defense Affairs. He was in charge. He appointed the people from Jema, his community, where he comes from. And the people now protested. So when Senikunche organized the coup, what happened was that the people generally supported him. Now come to 2023. What is responsible? There were coups in 1996, 2010, 2021, and so on and so forth. I do not want to talk about failed coups because in Niger was and still is a terra cognita for coup making. And they have been suppressing that without making too much noise. So when you take a look at it, there's nothing that has changed. The issue is simply that democracy was never given any room to develop. I know my colleague, Professor Ibrahim, has, I remember a time he organized a seminar long time ago. And I think I did participate in that, where we discussed this issue of democracy and the challenges to it. So my own evaluation of it is that, look, We are not serious about democracy in Africa. One. Secondly, the way our President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, be bad, looks at democracy, he is looking at it from a Nigerian perspective where we have shown a bit of seriousness of purpose. The coup in Africa generally is no longer basically coups organized by the military, by military junta. We now have a situation whereby the people themselves are involved. So, and I want to believe that if for whatever reason we want an environment of where we can develop democratic culture is to prevail, then we must sit down and address the dynamics of coup, especially in every country in the ECOWAS region. Finally, you know, this issue of democracy is a priori bastardized by African leaders. Because when you look at 1974 and today, all these presidents were trying to consolidate their powers, sit tight, you know, governments. That one, we must deal with that. Let me rest there meanwhile.
Okay, sir. Thank you for that. And I picked a few things, you know, from what you said. You know, now Niger Republic is becoming a fertile ground for coup making, and that you know, you said that African leaders have bastardized democracy. Recall one of the Fela Kuti's old songs. You know, he said it's democracy. You know, you did this song about 40 years ago, and today a professor is talking about us not being prepared for democracy. So we're not maturing. That's what I am learning from what you said. That when Ambassador Kesho was talking about Senegal, remember that 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was uprising in Senegal. Yes, so serious one, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was uprising in Senegal that was quelled after all. So my concern is this. The preponderance of coups in Francophone West African countries, and it does appear that the sub-regional organization, you know, is not doing any much. Whatever they do is not being impactful. Let me bring in the head of department of international relations based university, Dr. Adoyi Matthew O'Malley here. I want you to put all of the points made by the other speakers into context with respect to what we're dealing with today. It has to do with the coups, counter coups, and what have you in the West African sub-region.
Yes, I like what Professor Akinteriwa said about Niger being a hotbed of coup plot in the continent. It's not surprising. We have to look at how the democratization in the 90s, there were a wave of democratization that swept across most African countries, from Benin Republic to Togo and so on. There were a wave of democratic activity, especially with the rise of America as the single power in the world, and the pursuit of transformational diplomacy, which was pursued by Condoleezza Rice. Most African countries that were occupied by military attacks were giving way, and the world celebrated Africa at that time in the 90s, that democracy has taken root. But from what everybody has said here, it shows that it was just a fiery victory. It was not meant to last, because we are retrogressing back to the dark days of military regime. Why? Panelists here have said a lot about the quality of our democracy. What are the basic ingredients of democracy? The basic ingredients of democracy are rule of law. Are our African leaders sticking to the rule of law? Are they sticking to the various constitutional provisions of their country? Look at a country like Niger that has been very, very much impoverished, with droughts, with a lot of food crisis, infrastructural decay. In fact, Niger is one, yes, it has a lot of resources, but it's one of the poorest countries on the continent because of bad governance and a lot of issues. Now, why Niger is very strategic, that brings me to the question of whether it is external influence or not. Niger has uranium, which is a very, very important resource for the manufacture of nuclear weapons. And I think the Russians are involved in this crisis because of also resource diplomacy. The Wagner group is very active in the Sahel, and I know that they are also on ground in Niger Republic. In fact, footage of clips of videos I watched indicated that some of the initial protesters were waving Russian flags during this in the last few days before they were dispersed by the military. So it shows that we are creeping back dangerously into the new geopolitical order in the world. Africa is becoming a theater of influence among the contending powers in the international system, and it will not do us well. Don't forget that this is not only identified with the Francophone countries. I want to dispel that. In the 90s, Liberia is an Anglophone country. It was destabilized with a lot of conflict in Sierra Leone and Gambia when Yahya Jammeh refused to give power. So it's not about Anglophone or Francophone specifically. It's a general problem for the continent, and we have to do a lot. I'm worried because one of the key ingredients of democracy, which is free, fair, and credible election, is under threat in the continent. Why can we not have a free, fair, and credible elections in most of the African democracies? Political parties are weak, and all this, our leadership recruitment process is very faulty. And as long as these things are not put on ground, we will begin to see this thing manifest in instability, which coup is part of, or in civil insurrection, or in revolution, as the case might be in the extreme cases. So it's not just about coup. It could be revolution, which could be the people rising up to remove a government. Somehow in Africa we are too weak. So we have not been seeing a people's kind of revolt, a people's revolution against existing structures. And that is where the military is always being seen as being pushing a revolutionary agenda, which is very, very wrong. That is the only gap I see in Africa. Instead of the people, the power really emanating from the people, and the people rising up to protest against injustice, to protest against rigging of elections, to protest against sit-tight syndrome. The military, Africans wait for the military to give leadership in those instances.
All right, Dr. Molly, thank you very much there for the points that you have raised. Let's bring in one more time Professor Jibrin Ibrahim. Professor Jibrin, earlier you kicked off by saying that, look, we are seeing an intersection between challenges with democratic order in Africa, more particularly West Africa, and of course the role of external powers. We're talking about the occurrence in Niger Republic. It's like a domino effect. I mean, Guinea-Conakry under military rule, Mali under military rule, Burkina Faso under military rule, Niger Republic under military rule, all four French-speaking. It couldn't possibly be a mere coincidence. And how does that square with the view expressed by Professor Bola Akinteriwa that what we're having is a bastardization of democracy on the continent?
Well, definitely the democratic crisis is very serious. Take Guinea. When President Alpha Condé wanted to go for a third term, what did he do? He came to Daura to do Salah with President Buhari, then stayed there for 4 days, got a chieftaincy title and all that. And the following week, he declared he was going for a third term. The conditions for the elections were heavily rigged against the opposition, and he emerged for his third term in a context in which the opposition felt that there wasn't a level playing ground for the elections, and that was what led to the coup in a context of extreme ethnic politics, where the anti-Pol, they call them, the Fulani rhetorics of Alpha Conde was extremely high. At the end of the day, this can never save you, because his little cousin that he put as the head of the presidential guard was the one who finally organized the coup against him. The same thing had happened in Mali, when the last elections were heavily rigged. So when we talk about coup in this zone of the world, there are three forms of coup, and all of them are happening. One is a coup against the constitutional order. You change the constitution illegally to give yourself a third term. The second is a coup against the elections. You rig the elections heavily so that you continue in power without the mandate of the people. And the third coup is a military coup in response to what the political leadership has done. But I still think the question of economic interests are extremely important. In Niger, I think it was Bola who was making the point that you are the one making the point about uranium. In fact, the 1974 coup, I disagree with Bola that it was the ethnic dimension that caused it in Niger. It was actually the decision of President Hamani Diori to raise the price of uranium that made France very angry. And once France gets angry at you in Francophone Africa, you go down. What is the problem of France today? These regimes are resisting being removed by France, and that's the context in which the Russians and Wagner have become a major force, because Wagner is also very keen about uranium in Niger. So there's this new scramble for African resources. I think the issue, we are focusing too much that they are Francophone countries. Yes, that's one dimension, but the other important dimension is that they are Sahelian countries, and there is violent extremism characterizing that whole zone, and that the dynamics of that violent extremism produces a security crisis that the armed forces of those countries are unable to deal with. And in that context of generalized insecurity, people then become very critical of whatever government is in place, and in that context, political instability. You recall when the coup happened in Mali and the military took over, that military was itself subsequently removed by another military who said they were not adequately dealing with the security situation. So I think the whole question of violent extremism in the Sahel is an extremely important part of that equation which we should bring in.
Yes, because when you mentioned violent extremism, I just give it a thought, because, they look like warriors, so to speak. I mean, even historically. But that will have ended by now, because we're seeing a new trend now with respect to coups and counter-coups in those countries. Well, Ambassador Keshi, let's talk about this Wagner Group, the influence of Wagner Group in the Sahel because of the uranium that they get from Niger and other Francophone countries. Now, in international relations, is it allowed for a nation or a group of gangs or a group of persons, armed persons, to enter a country, stay in the country, have a military base in the country for God knows how long? And when we talk about internal crisis in such nations, it does appear that there are also influence from those foreigners living in that environment. Now, make it clear to us as to whether it is allowed for such activity by warring groups like Wagner Group, who is now even we were told that they have returned to Ukraine to continue from where they stopped. So how can we put a stop to such, I would call it invasion of foreign military groups engaging in Africa for decades?
I think we are giving undue credit to this Russian group, in my view. I think we are giving an unnecessary credit to the activities because, quite frankly, they are in Mali, but there's no record of the fact that they have even helped Mali to solve the problems. So if everybody thinks that they are here because they want uranium or they want whatever they want in this part of the world, the Russians have had very long relationship with almost all these countries, so they don't really need them if they want to buy uranium, if that's the issue itself. So in my view, I just think that we are beginning to lay unnecessary emphasis on this group when the activities on the continent is not even very clear, when they are not operating beyond 1 or 2 countries in this part of the world. The fact of the matter, like in Mali, they were invited because these fellows needed a kind of buffer as they sent off the French in their, crisis with the rebels, in that part of the world. But nothing has changed. And I think, as he rightly pointed out, remember that the soldiers who were sent to the front came back to stage the coup, and their complaint was that they were not being supported, they were not being given the wherewithal to fight. And even when the gentleman took over, another group removed him. So there must be something, look, we must focus on the fact that there must be something internal that is creating this problem rather than looking, to blame external forces, all the time when there is, when these crises are in place. And I keep pointing out to anybody who wants to listen that when you look at development elsewhere in the world, there were 3, 4, 5 triggers, which our folks are not focusing. In this part of the world, and I think we're having this conversation before we came into the studio. All we praise some of our governors are, we give them an award for infrastructure. Nobody looked at the fact that they never did anything in education. Nobody looked at the fact that they never they never did anything in agriculture. There are a couple of states you can look around this country today. I'm talking of Nigeria. And in the last 20 years, governors have not built one factory, one industrial, And so why do we have a high rate of unemployment? So tomorrow, if anything happens, somebody will say, external forces. The leaders are not focusing on what they need to do. They are not doing well in terms of building up the human capacity. They are not doing well in terms of creating, enough things for employment. And that gives rise to the discontent in the society, which the military offer. Well, now I'm actually confused because in the case of Niger, and I think your Bola pointed it out, I can make a difference between the presidential guard and the military. Because in Niger, there was a news item that the military is now supporting the presidential, guard. And very often in these countries, the presidential guard are relations. The head of are relations of the president. And then you now find the whole military of the country now saying we are supporting the presidential guard, the small, unit of the military itself. So I keep saying the fact that, yes, this crisis, when you look at the whole thing, it also has to do with internal situations that we need to focus on.
Just a word on the presidential guard. I say on the presidential guard in Niger, yes. The fact is that they are autonomous from the army.
Okay.
And the commander of this presidential guard has been the commander for 10 years. He was appointed by President
the former president.
And the delay in the coup was negotiation between the presidential guard and the army. The issue has not been resolved, There has not been any head of state announced so far. Abdurrahman, who announced the coup, is a placeholder until the Presidential Guard and the army are able to resolve their differences.
Well, on the face of it, that would appear to be somewhat salutary, considering what is playing out in the Sudan.
Exactly.
Would that be correct?
Exactly.
Yeah, otherwise, there would have been another, there would just be a civil war right on our borders. Because we saw what has happened with the Rapid Response Force in Sudan and the armed forces, and what is still, is well over 100 days now, but thousands have been killed, and of course, Sudan is just going up in flames.
Kingsley, so you can, sorry to interrupt you, so you can see the wisdom in this country. Remember there was a time I wanted to create a National Guard. Yes. And the military rose up against it. Who knows what could have happened if we had the National Guard and the military, you know.
Right. That was an idea under the military presidency of General Ibrahim Babangida. Let's bring in again Professor Bola Akinteriwa. Professor Bola Akinteriwa, there are a number of issues you may wish to respond or further clarify or elaborate on them, but on the fundamental aspect relating to democracy, because democracy is ordinarily not and shouldn't be an end in itself. It's a means, it's a driver for the delivery of public goods. You say that democracy on the continent is being bastardized. Are we having now, in an inchoate form, an African model of democracy with the problematics that are generated by it?
You see, depending on how you want to interpret and understand democracy, your question will be very, very relevant. You see, when, for instance, African scholars, African leaders will take one aspect of an issue to make a general conclusion, that will be a problem. When I talk about bastardization of democracy, let us go back to the early 2000s. In fact, going back to the La Baule conference in France. La Baule conference was convened within the framework of the Franco-African Summit, during which the then president of France, François Mitterrand, now came up with what observers call democratization fever. Because President Mitterrand said that development aid will only henceforth be given to countries that accept to democratize. So it was a policy eventually which other European, American countries accepted in order to ensure, in order to prevent coup making in Africa. Because by that time, it was a season of coups, unlimited coups. Now when they came with this idea that you either democratize or you do not have any development aid, you saw, we see, and we are still more likely to see that African leaders quickly began to redress their policy stand. But look at that time, more than 2 decades, we have not moved away seriously from coup making. My brother Gibrin referred to Mali and other cases. You see, when you look at Mali as a case study, could it be said that it is a military coup or a civilian coup? I ask this question because when the Malians were complaining about the parliamentary elections, the results being rigged, when the people were complaining about what they call atrocities of the government, what did African leaders do? What did the ECOWAS leaders do? Nobody responded to the complaints of the people, which prompted when the situation was deteriorating to the extent that nobody could predict the likelihood, what will eventually happen, it was then the military took advantage of it and came in. Now, what is bastardization of democracy? The president was duly elected, fine, under democratic regulations. But how did the president operate? That is what I call bastardization. Now, the ECOWAS leaders now came up talking about unconstitutional changes of government. Now, what will ECOWAS do? Do you want to deal with the government that came illegally to power, or the people that are supporting the coup makers? So it is very critical for me to differentiate between either civilian supported coup or what I will easily call civilian coup, because at the end of the day, even when ECOWAS made efforts to sanction of the coup, like they did in 1974, Professor Dibrin Ibrahim was saying that it was not, for instance, an ethnic motivated coup in 1974. That is one school of thought. Psychology of human differences will enable me to agree with you. But I'm telling you that I can ask the question. Did the people of Niger that were mainly reserved for the German people, if that was true, then that cannot be a dynamic of the coup. Secondly, when the people were complaining about the impact, the implication of the 1968-1972 drought in the Sahel and so on and so forth, and there was no food, was it not true that Amani Diori stored, warehoused 3 tons of grains? And the people were now saying, look, that cannot be. Why would you be keeping this for price increase in the future? I'm drawing this when the history of coup making will be told by the people.
Well, we are going to pause it for now because we're beginning to have difficulties along the line of communication with your line. For now, let's return to Abuja here, Abuja studio, where we still have 3 other guests that we are engaging this morning. And I'd like to return again to the HOD of the International Relations and Diplomacy Based University. Now, Ambassador Keshi raised a very important point, which has to do with the internal crisis. Even historically speaking, when we did history of all these Mali Empire, Songhai Empire, and so on and so forth, when they say the downfall of those empires started internally, then there could be external forces, so to speak. That is when the person concerned domestically decides to reach out to somewhere else for external support. That also happens. I recall vividly one American, who was, I'm not sure he's been jailed, but he was accused of being a mercenary to a coup in either Mali or Burkina Faso. He came and did a coup design for them as a mercenary and what have you. Now, talking about internal crisis and governance in Africa, what do you see our leaders doing? Can we have leaders like Thomas Sankara? Can we have leaders like Kwame Nkrumah? Can we have leaders like Nnamdi Azikiwe any longer? Because from what we're getting across Africa, we don't seem to have such personalities anymore. After Mandela, we seem to be looking for good leaders in Africa that will lead by example. So what is happening?
Yes, Africa we are really short of. Not that we are short of. We are really, the leadership question is a very serious matter. I recollect that maybe because of when we were fighting for independence, the nationalist movement threw up some of the people you were mentioning. Osagyefo, Kwame Nkrumah, Ahmed Sékou Touré, Julius Nyerere. There were quite some
Patrice
Lumumba. We had, it was the nationalist movement that threw up most of these people, even about Mokale and several other of them, Nnamdi Azikiwe and so on. It was the nationalist movement that threw them up. Now we need a crop of leaders in the mold of these nationalists. We cannot continue to have the current crop of leaders that we have in Africa. In fact, now it's slightly better. From the time of Mobutu Sese Seko, Kamuzu Banda of Malawi, they were all like clowns. If you see them at that time.
Emperor Bokassa,
and so
Idi Amin of Uganda.
Idi Amin of Uganda. You know, it gave Africa a very, very bad picture of the type of people that we are. We are not like that, but those leaders at that time. Then, in the 90s, a new crop of leadership emerged. And this new crop of leadership that emerged was slightly different from those ones. And now another crop has emerged. A crop of, some of them very educated, if you see, they are very educated. But again, they lack the ideological depth. We complain in Nigeria that our political parties and our leaders, most of them do not have ideology. And this is not peculiar to Nigeria, it's across Africa. Most of the key political players do not have any ideological foundation. And this brings me to the point of Western influence. Why you are seeing that most of these coups are happening in Francophone countries, you can safely conclude because of the process of assimilation. The vice-like grip of France on the economy, socio-economic life of the Francophone country. This is a direct resistance to this over-domineering attitude of France. We in the Anglophone countries, we have some degree of freedom. We have some degree which most of the Francophone countries do not have. In fact, the French, I cannot count where the British have their bases in any Francophone country up to now. It's only the Americans that are in the Gulf of Guinea. But the France maintained strong military presence in most of the Francophone countries. And this brings me to the issue of instability that Professor Jibril talked about. Now with the raging ISIS crisis, with the Islamic fundamentalism in the Sahel, like he said, the military have been stretched to a limit. And it takes purposeful leadership, ability to organize, ability to give, as commander-in-chief, the president or the leadership is supposed to be at the forefront in tackling some of these security challenges. But what do we see? We see a lot of complacency. So much time is devoted to petty politics in the name of ethnicity, in the names of stacking money in foreign bank accounts, in the name of lopsided appointments. Just like you say, you see father, son, uncle heading the military establishment and the economic sector. So we have not been able to have the ideological leadership like we have in people like Nelson Mandela. And until we in Africa begin to imbibe this spirit of electing competent leaders, electing ideologically based leaders, then we'll continue grappling with this problem of leadership, because it is very fundamental to warding off this problem of coup and counter coups in the continent. If people are satisfied with the leadership, it is the people who themselves will rise up and stop any military junta from coming up. But you see, most times when this coup happens,
they jubilate.
People will just say, well, at least there's a hope that something good may come out of it.
Okay. Dr. Mali, thank you very much for your intervention. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation. Yeah, welcome back. And it's still Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Let's come quickly to Professor Jibrin Ibrahim. Let me preface my question with this. In 2017, when then President Robert Mugabe was firmly pressed into resignation as president of the country, the Zimbabwean military was careful not to label it a coup, even though in all appearances it seemed to have been that Mugabe exited unwillingly. But they said, look, it's a coup. No, it's not a coup. And that was because, in one sense, there was concern about what the SADC reactions would be, because the SADC principles frown at unconstitutional change of governments. ECOWAS also has similar protocols. But we have seen that this is, as we said, Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea Conakry, and now Niger. This has been observed more in the breach. What is it that a sub-regional entity like ECOWAS and ultimately a continental body like the AU and overall the UN can do, if at all, there is much, recognizing the sovereignty principle in international relations?
Well, you know, the sovereignty principle has been tempered in international relations because we are long gone the days where non-interference in the internal affairs of your neighbor was the standing principle. Now, in West Africa, there's what we call the constitutional convergence principles, which are supported by the Supplementary Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance, that imposes a set of democratic norms that all the countries in the region must respect. And that's why when these coups occur, ECOWAS and the African Union has always come out very clearly to call for a reversal to the constitutional order and to impose sanctions. Of course, the sanction regime have been very problematic because there is first debate. Are you punishing the regime that has taken over or the people of that country who have no responsibility for the coup d'etat? But there's also the response. You recall the crisis with Mali was because of what happened in Chad. In Chad, there was a coup. The son took over from the father. Instead of power going to the president of the National Assembly, the African Union, where the president, Faki, was basically aided to the position by his country, did not come out with a strong position. And then Mali happened and said, no, we won't tolerate Mali. Why do you tolerate Chad and you do not tolerate Mali? And then the Malians started saying, well, to hell with you then. We are going our way. And I agree completely with Ambassador. You must always look at the dynamics of these things and the forces at play internally, and definitely the Wagner growth in Mali was much more the new head of state trying to defend himself and get supporters given the context of the politics he was playing. The problem with the norms we've established in West Africa, and we saw that clearly in December last year, there was a proposal at the Accra summit that there should be inserted in the protocol an article that says no president can go for a third term in office. 3 countries opposed that change. Macky Sall, because he was planning his third term. The president of Cote d'Ivoire, I've forgotten his name, Ouattara, because he was already in third term. And the third country was Togo, who has now been in power for 20 years after his father had been in power for over 35 years. So the self-interests of some of our leaders are usually the root cause of the democracy crisis we encounter. So these people all said no. I think the terrible thing that happened in Accra, and I raised it repeatedly with ECOWAS whenever I have the opportunity to talk to them, is that the summit even decided that the decision not to change the protocol should be maintained a secret, and the West African people should not be allowed to have access to the proposed change. Because I went there to demand for the content of the proposed change, and it was refused. So I was telling them, you say we are moving to the West Africa of the people. We are the people. I am a citizen of West Africa. Why are you now excluding me even from information on what's going on? So I do hope now that President Tinubu has shown a desire to reclaim the traditional leadership role Nigeria plays in the region, and has been quite strong in the last few weeks over these issues, we'll begin to see a change. Because the crisis really in ECOWAS for quite some time is the retreat of Nigeria's leadership position. And Mali is always very critical. Recall what happened in 2012 when the violent extremists were moving to take over Bamako. And Mali appealed to their neighbors to send in troops to defend them. There was a crisis of logistics. The Americans were approached and they said, no, the African militaries violate human rights, so they want to train the military for 1 year before they are deployed. The insurrectionists had that and said, thank God for the Americans. And that was when they started moving to Bamako. And it was at that moment that Mali had to call on France to come in and intervene to stop them. So it was a failure of the leadership of ECOWAS, of the neighbors, that created the space France had to deepen its hold in the Sahel.
Yeah, you're really talking about the intricate matters here now, when we need diplomatic matters. ECOWAS used to be strong. We recall ECOMOG activities in Liberia and Sierra Leone and what have you. Then it has a teeth to bite, but this time around we are seeing a more docile, if you like, I apologize for that word, of ECOWAS, because they're not being very effective in terms of ensuring that countries within the sub-region are well taken care of in terms of these cues. Now, let's return to Ambassador Kesho once more. From what President Bola Tinubu said just yesterday, that he's going to be having a conversation with the UK, EU, US, UN on this issue of cues in Africa. And Ambassador Kesho, I'm taking you on this because you said you play down, foreign interference in all of this. And he has just given us an example of how Mali, relied on France to stop people from marching to Bamako. So from all indications, it appears that these cues may not happen successfully without one or two interferences or one of influences here and there, although they are generated by internal crises. But some of those, the parties in internal crisis will as well look out for external assistance. Now, why is Bola Tinubu talking to EU, UK, US, and UN on these key matters? What will he be telling them?
I wish I know. I wish I know. Look, it's an illusion. Even when you declare that there'll be no more coups, it's an illusion. You don't have the means, you don't have the powers to prevent these things. You don't even have a standing army that you could say, go to Niger and stop this nonsense. You don't. And this is why we sometimes advise leaders, stay by the script, the brief that has been prepared. Don't go beyond it, so that you don't create more problems for yourself. What are you going to discuss with the British for? They are not responsible for what is going to happen in Francophone, Africa, or the EU. The EU is giving a lot of assistance to a number of countries in this part of the world. And sometimes they also complain about how these assistants are misused and getting nowhere. So what are you going to talk to them about? That they should ensure that there's no more crew? No, look, I've always made the point, that's where, you know, West Africa, ECOWAS, is where it is today because of the failure of Nigeria. If Nigeria grows, you'll see tremendous changes in the region. Because, number one, economically, the interaction would help. In terms of leadership, it would also help. Because look, from here to Togo or to Ivory Coast, if we have to export by sea, not talking of road, from here to Ivory, if you want to send anything, it takes about 3 days. If you go by the big trailers, by ship, probably less. If we were a productive country and we're supplying most of what West Africa needs, it would take 7 days for a ship or more from France to any of these countries. It would take just a few days here. We would have finished selling our goods. Nobody would tell France that Nigeria has taken over the market of West, And that would also have a, ripple effect in terms of what goes on in the region. But because we ourselves have not grown, everybody talks of ECOMOG. You know how much we spent in ECOMOG? Nigeria virtually carried the burden of ECOMOG. And that's why I'm not sure anybody is keen on it anymore. And for the fact that even our military, post-ECOMOG, they've not been able to address some of our internal crises. And I heard, I don't know, one of the military fellows saying that we have to learn how to, fight non-conventional, because that's what we are dealing with. And my question for one who was also involved with these guys, who did you fight in Liberia and Sierra Leone? So what was the experience from your activities there? So we have to realize that if we really want to do anything substantial and make ECOWAS strong, we have to be strong in the first instance. And that will give us the ability, the capacity, the confidence to be able to pull all other these countries along. So when the SADC country, when South Africa it was because South Africa was sure that it could deal with the situation in that part of the world. Besides, apart from Uganda I can't even remember how many countries there have experienced coups. And in terms of democracy, they're also beginning to do relatively better than us. Regimes, never mind the crisis, for example, in Kenya, but they are doing the best they can. Only yesterday or 2 days ago, the president of Kenya said, look, given the crisis we are going through, I'm going to sit down and talk with the opposition leader and find a way out. So they are beginning to, do well in terms of democracy. They're also beginning to do well slightly in terms of leadership, except, of course, in Uganda, which has its own peculiar problem, including tailoring issues. If you know what I mean, So,
Ambassador Keshi, thank you very much. Well, they've had those issues since 1986, when the Hemsman got into office, and you have all kinds of dynastic arrangements around the place. Professor Bola Akintarewa, we saw you a moment ago. I'm sure that your lines are clearer now. I just want to, let's get your own take on what more substantively regional bodies and other international institutions such as ECOWAS, AU, and the UN can do in the current circumstance. What intervention might be meaningful for us? Because let's be realistic. Niger is going to be in some crisis, some instability for a while, no matter what happens.
Well, I'm very happy that you have given me a hypothetical submission, which is a major dynamic of what to be done if we are really to prevent, if we are really to nip in the bud future coup makings. You see, the major problem in Niger is that we are talking about a coup. But it's more than coup making. It's more than coup d'etat. The mere fact that France, the United States, do have military bases, they have different agreements. The mere fact that while they are there, considering that Bazoum is the most reliable ally to deal with as of today, in an attempt to be able to contain, Russian influence in that particular country. It is a truism to tell you that Niger is francophone with much French influence there. Now we are going to have a conflict of interest in Niger. Niger is most likely to become a battleground between for power rivalry between Wagner Group and Russia on the one hand, then France and the United States on the other. So I do agree with you that the future is not bright in terms of political stability for Niger. But what is it that could be done in this particular case? The first thing is to address the distinction between military coups and civilian coups that are eventually emerging. Civilians will not carry arms, etc. along, but their tool remains essentially public, protest. They will be protesting, and in this case, for Nigeria, for ECOWAS, what we should be doing is, first of all, to adopt a guiding hypothesis that coup d'etat can occur at any time. It is not by wishful thinking that there will not be coup, and then people can now begin to borrow the words of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, that we cannot sit down and be watching, coup after coup in the region. We must, especially in Nigeria, disabuse our mind that there cannot be coup in Nigeria. When you think that there can be coup, then you prepare for it, you anticipate. You put in place programmatic policies that can nip them in the bud. But when you do not think that it is likely, then you won't do anything. Second point, the coup so far in Niger Republic, basically and largely, is as a result of poor, very bad governance. Take any particular coup, study it, look at the causal factors. Bad governance was an issue. Now, when you look at, for instance, the issue of United Nations, ECOWAS, African Union, they like making, laws, constitutions, statements. We do not want this. We will oppose this. But they easily forget that they always have very little means to intervene. I didn't say interfere, to intervene, because you too and Ambassador Keshi raised the issue of ECOMOG, whether ECOMOG 1 or ECOMOG 2. In this case, who is interested in it? Yes, the ECOWAS has very little means to actually prevent. At best, when there are coups, what they normally do is simply to ask for further assistance from the United Nations, which may not be readily forthcoming. So what can we really do? Very honestly, I think that African leaders should decide to ensure good governance.
Yeah. All right, Professor Bola Akintayo, I think you've made a point very clear. African leaders should adopt a new system of governance, ensuring that Whatever policy you have trickles down to the ordinary citizen of that country. If that does not happen, then the likelihood of getting coup d'etats in countries that people don't have patience is 100%, and that's what you have told us. And at this point, we'd like to thank you, Professor Bola Akintere, former Director General of the Nigerian Institute for International Affairs. We appreciate your time and again your thoughts on this program. Now back to the studio, and for us to round off this edition of the program, let's get in Dr. Adoyi Matthew Omale. I'm sure he's a political scientist. Round off this conversation.
I think what is happening in Niger should be a lesson to all other African countries. Just like Professor Akintere has said, coup can happen at any time, and we must be prepared to deal with it. There is no justification for military coup in Africa or anywhere in the world. No matter the problems, no matter the issues, there is no justification for it. And we must all join hands to condemn using the gun to take power. So there's no justification for it. But however, it is inevitable as long as we are not doing the right things, as long as certain mechanisms are not put in place. ECOWAS should be proactive. There's no reason why ECOMOG as a standing force should not be maintained.
Okay, Dr. Omale, we're really pressed for time. We'd like to thank all our guests this morning for the very incisive examination of the subject matter, Lessons for Africa. From the crisis in Niger Republic, Dr. Adoyi Matthew Omale, Head of Department, International Relations and Diplomacy at the University in Abuja. Well, thank you very much for being our guest today. We also would like to thank Professor Jibrin Ibrahim, Senior Fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development. Prof, thanks for being around. Ambassador Joe Keshi, seasoned diplomat and former Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Always a delight having you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
Earlier we signed off Professor Bola Akintere, former DG, Institute of International Affairs. Let's go over now to our sports desk.
Nigeria Super Falcons recorded a shock 3-2 win against co-host Australia in their second Group B game on Thursday. The win means the Super Falcons, now on 4 points, go top of Group B. It is the 9-time African champions' first win against Australia at the Women's World Cup in their second meeting. Also, it is Africa's first win at this year's tournament, co-hosted by Australia and New Zealand. Goals from Uchenna Kanu, Osinachi Ohale and substitute Asisato Shuala secured a hard-fought win for the Falcons. The game saw head coach Randy Waldrum make some changes in his starting 11, with the trio of Kanu, Rashida Tajibade and Halimotu Aide getting starting berths. Meanwhile, forward Asisato Shuala becomes the third Falcon after Rita Onwadike and Rita Okosieme to score 3 goals at a single World Cup, and the first African woman to score at 3 consecutive World Cups. The Falcons will now be looking to finish from Group B in flying fashion when they lock horns with already eliminated debutants, Republic of Ireland. Meanwhile, Serie A giants AC Milan have announced the signing of Super Eagles forward Samuel Chukwueze from Villarreal in a deal reported to worth €28 million plus add-ons. Milan announced the signing in a statement released on their website on Thursday. Chukwueze signed a 5-year contract that will run till 2028. During his time at Villarreal, Chukwueze helped the La Liga side win the UEFA Europa League title in 2020-2021 season.
Making this kind of advance in my career, I think, is the most important thing for me. And I think I can't wait to start playing here because I think here I can develop me more. And I think I can't wait to hear the fans chat.
Well, Kisley, that's it's a good note.
Absolutely.
You know, our lads making it elsewhere across the globe, internationally.
Congratulations to the Super Falcons as well. So best wishes to them as they take on the Republic of Ireland in their last round-robin match. That's it for us on Good Morning Nigeria for today and a day for the week. Monday, we come up with a fresh package, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Look after yourselves. I'm Kingsley Sunderland.
And I'm Kirian Umaya. I'll see you again next week.